This is Shattered Roots, Broken Families, and Postcolonial Displacement in Oil and Water and Blood Diamond. Hello everyone, my name is Donovan Bullock, and today I'll be presenting and focusing on a comparative analysis of Helen Habila's novel, Oil on Water, and Edward Zwick's film, Blood Diamond. My focus is on how both films work to depict a national fragmentation through the intimate lens of broken families and displacement, particularly in post-colonial African context shaped by global resource extraction. And excuse me if I look down, I'm looking at my script, so please excuse that. Thank you very much and enjoy. And now to my main thesis. My main thesis is both Oil on Water and Blood Diamond portray the collapse of post-colonial nations through the metaphor of broken families and the reality of displacement. Each text draws a direct line between natural resource extraction and the erosion of social and familial bonds, but they do this using distinct narrative and aesthetic strategies tied to their respective medium forms. The novel uses reflective psychological narration to explore the internal displacement and emotional detachment, while the film mobilizes this using cinematic elements to spectate and dramatize the literal family rupture that forces a nation to rupture. Both texts critique the failure of post-colonial nationhood in the face of global and capital corruption. So, viewer, audience, you ask me, Donovan, why does this matter? Well, my dear audience, let me tell you, even though these are two works of fiction, these stories are very real. Let me tell you why. It's all about the historical context. To understand these narratives, we must acknowledge the real histories behind them. To conflict driven by transactional oil companies and political corruption resulted in environmental destruction and internal displacement. In Sierra Leone, the diamond trade bankrolled civil war and the use of child soldiers. These historical ruptures are not just backdrops, they actively shape the broken families we see that builds up the entire setting of both texts that we read or the film that we watch. Let's take a look at a real-world man from a real place that went through a real tragedy and came out as a survivor. Here is Jose Tinga, a survivor of the brutal Sierra Leone Civil War, who lived to tell his story and eventually grew up to be a peace builder and a foundational piece in his community. He is truly an honorable man and a man of service. From Jose's direct account, he states, "By the time the RUF invaded Calhoun in 1992, I was country director for the Canadian NGO Cause Canada. As implementing partners with the UN, Cause was responsible for managing the care and maintenance of 15,000 encamped Liberian refugees, as well as distributing relief food to more than. At one such food distribution session, I was directing in Bo, southern Sierra Leone. I noticed familiar faces from Calhoun. My heart sank and I nearly threw up. When I saw my former host family standing in line waiting for food handouts. Unbelievable, I thought. How could this happen to such an amazingly generous people? War is so cruel and depriving. These people had a nice house, were self-providing, relatively comfortable, and loved strangers. And now, here, they were hungry, displaced, and destitute. For me, this was the kicker. In my own small way, I needed to do more to improve peaceful coexistence among most vulnerable populations, who were always the worst victims of conflict. Living in peace should not be taken for granted. Peace should be pursued. World peace is possible. But there is work to be done through the first-hand accounts and the memories of Mr. Tinga that family matters. When you see your family go through something and you see your family get split apart, you see them go from these big, nice, rich environments and culture and communities around them to split into having to struggle and survive for every little thing, even to get one loaf of bread as a special commodity. When Mr. Tinga speaks on stuff like this, you see how that affects the children and the children of the children. And after you see family by family by family getting displaced and split apart due to these impacts that are coming from when the colonists left, therefore the post-colonialism. When you see this happening over and over and over and over again, it creates a cycle. And this cycle feeds into more war, more destruction, and more corruption. So as you can see, the family center is the key piece that ties everything together. And when that's broken, the nation is broken. Alrighty, folks, now let's get back to Helen Habila's novel, Oil on Water. Let's take a look at one specific passage, analyze it, and see how it connects back to my main thesis. Let's read the passage. The next village was almost a replica of the last. The same empty, squat dwelling, ripe and flagrant stretch, the bareness, the oil, slick, and the same indefinable sadness in the air, as if a community of ghosts were suspended above the punctured zinc roofs, unwilling to depart, yet powerless to return. In the village center, we found the communal well, eager for a drink. I bent under the wet, mossy pivotal beam and peered into the well's blackness, but a rank smell wafted from its hot depths and slapped in my face. I reeled away, my head aching from the encounter. Something organic, perhaps human, lay dead and decomposing down there. A stench mixed with the unmistakable smell of oil. At the end of the village, a little river trickled toward the bigger river where we left our boat. The patch of grass growing by the water was suffocated by a film of oil, each blade covered with blotches like the river spots on a smoker's hand. We felt drained just standing there, so we left. We pushed by the boat into deeper water, scrambled in. By now, Zach seemed to have lost his energy and the will to lift the bottle to his mouth. It lay neglected by his feet, the piss-colored liquid in the sloshing black back and forth with the movement of the boat. It sat with his hands spread wide on either side of his seat, holding for dear life. And with each motion of the boat, I waited for the vomit to come spewing out of his mouth. But somehow he kept it down. Do you want to stop at the next village? No, no, no. No more villages. Oil on Water, Helen Habila uses Rufus's journey to reflect the psychic dislocation of an entire nation. As he navigates polluted creeks and abandoned settlements, we sense the fragmentation not just of the geography, but of identity. Families have disappeared, and entire towns are empty. Habila's prose is quiet and contemplative. The first-person narration creates psychological intimacy. We experience Rufus growing, numbness as a mirror of national apathy. This is a novel of atmosphere, fog, water, rot, evoking a nation emotionally and physically submerged. Literature allows for this to slow, layered portrayal of internal displacement. Habila continues still in chapter 1. The chapters might be, the page numbers might be a little off because I used the PDF version, but it's still in chapter 1. The quote is, "The village looked as if a deadly epidemic had swept through it. A square concrete platform dominated the village center like some sacrificial altar. Abandoned oil drilling paraphernalia were strewn around the platform. Some appeared to be sprouting out of widening cracks in the concrete alongside thick clumps of grass. High up in the rusty rigging, wasps flew out their nest. The houses began not too far away from the... We covered our noses and moved on to the next compound, but it wasn't much different. Cooking pots stood open and empty on cold hearths. Next to them stood water pots filled with water on whose surface mosquito larvae thickly flourished. It took less than an hour to traverse the little village, going from one deserted household to the next, taking pictures, hoping to meet perhaps one accidental straggler, one survivor, one voice to interview. We left. Zach looked as he were about to throw up. His face was sweaty, and he raised the bottle to his lips many times before the alertness returned to his eyes. We often stopped to rest, and the river grew narrower each time we set out again. Soon, we were in a dense mangrove swamp. The water underneath us had turned foul and phosphorus. Insects rose from the surface in swarms to settle in a mobile cloud above us, biting our arms and faces and ears. The boy and the old man appeared to be oblivious to the insects. They kept their eyes narrowed, focused on burrowing the boat through the gnarled hanging roots, and grew out of the water like proboscis gasping for air. The atmosphere grew heavy with a suspended stench of dead matter. We floated a bend in the river, and in front of us we saw dead birds draped over the trees, branches, and outstretched wings, black and slick with oil. Dead fish bobbed white-bellied between tree roots. These two passages that I just read from Helen Havila's novel, Oil on Water, all found in chapter 1. The page numbers are a little off because it is a PDF version. But both of these passages show the absolute catastrophic devastation that is left from these oil companies. And they all start from the families. The families are gone, taken out of their homes, and stripped from everything they know, everything they love. And when that happens, everything around them dies. And it just doesn't happen from internally inside this community. It comes from these post-colonial effects. The one post-colonial effect is these huge oil corporations. These oil corporations didn't just come out yesterday or tomorrow or the day before. These are from systematic racist institutions that were developed over thousands of years through colonialism. And after colonialism ended in the continent of Africa, its nasty effects did not. They still left families broken, and they still left the environment completely ravaged, as we saw in those first two passages, and families displaced. This passage paints a grim and vivid portrait of environmental devastation and human and ecological toll that comes with oil exploitation. The imagery is striking with words like deadly and epidemic and abandoned oil and decomposing. The setting is a once thriving village that's now reduced to a deserted, decaying space. And this is symbolic of the destruction that comes from the loss of families from the oil industry. In contrast, Blood Diamond uses cinematic urgency to show rupture. The central image is stark when Solomon's son is kidnapped and brainwashed by the rebels. The family is literally torn apart on camera, and Solomon lingers in horror, then follows him across a fragmented landscape, checkpoints, camps, and rivers. This moment crystallizes the violence of post-colonial crisis. The child is weaponized, the father powerless. It's also a metaphor for the future generations being seized by chaos. This film works differently from literature. It trades introspection for immediacy. Zwick uses handy camera work, rapid cuts, musical score to create tension. Family rupture becomes spectacle. This engages emotions, but also risks aesthetically showing trauma. We can also see this aesthetic trauma in Heart of Darkness. And we can see that through the psychological rupture and the colonial terrain that's shown in the novel Heart of Darkness. All of it is absolutely and completely used for entertainment, but also shows the psychological rupture. This is the exact scene where Dia is taken and Solomon is running to try to help his son, to try to run away from the rebels. I wanted to highlight this specific still shot from this scene specifically because it shows the exact moment when we can see that family being torn apart in the film. Now, going back to the slide I just showed, I specifically wanted to show this scene is because that's when Solomon finally finds Dia and tries to get him to go back to his loving family, but the damage has already been done. He's been brainwashed, and it's going to take a little bit more for Dia to go back to her family. We will eventually see he does, but it takes a lot of Solomon and all the other characters to surround Dia and put a lot just for him to just go back to his father. And we see that much damage done in such a short period of time. And this is a real world. Like, even though this is a fictional story, this really happened to many children, unfortunately, throughout the Sierra Leone Civil War. Now to look at a specific article that we read in class and try to, pull from an academic source to strengthen my argument and to add a new element and nuance to this critique that I'm trying to make in this entire presentation. Oil and water and blood diamond natural resource extraction is not merely a backdrop, but the driving force behind narrative disintegration and familial rupture. Jacquemart and Grievensen's concept of extractive film offers a critical framework to analyze these works beyond their specific national context, placing them within global history of media's complicity and commodification of life, land, and labor. The article argues that film has historically functioned as an unfaithful ally to extractive industries by helping transform our planets into to matter and resources for racial capitalism through cycles of conquest and enslavement. Blood Diamond, though its visceral and cinematic spectacle and action-driven narrative embodies what Jacquemart and Grieveson call the dramatization of extraction, its depiction of forced child soldiering, fractured families, and the global diamond trade and commodification of minerals transform social bonds into instruments of exploitation. This aligns with the essay's claim that media often serves to naturalize and exploit mechanisms of empire and global capital. Literary introspection and psychological narration to trace internalized trauma of displacement. The novel form resists spectacle and instead maps emotional and spatial dislocations caused by oil and water exploitation in the Niger Delta. This reflects Jacquemart's emphasis on media forms that resist the reflection of an activist narrative by focusing on microhistories. Together, both texts reflect what Jacquemart and Grieveson term the capitalist scene, a period marked by global systems of extraction rooted in racial capitalism where media forms are deeply embedded in infrastructures of exploitation. The broken families and displaced individuals in Oil and Water and Blood Diamond are symptomatic of what Jacquemart and Grieveson describe as reordering of reality. That extraction demands a world where kinship is expendable, land is plundered, and identity is rewritten through resource economies. Thank you so much for watching. Please continue to do your own research and find out more about these pressing issues and these pressing topics because they're very important to the world we live in. And the more we research, the more we connect to not only our environment, but the environment around us, the more we get better as a global society. And these are my sources. Thank you very much and have a great day.